Good evening and welcome back to the Ask Dr. Renee show here at blackdoctor.org. I am your host, of course, Dr. Renee. And tonight I just want to preface by saying we are going to be talking about sex. So if you have young ones and you need to have them leave the room, then please have them leave the room. But if you have ones that are of the right age, they need to come in the room so that you all can have a great conversation together. So in case you didn't know, this week we celebrated National Youth HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. So, according to recent stats, young people ages 12 to 25 are disproportionately impacted by HIV/AIDS and new diagnosis of other STIs and STDs. Furthermore, those stats also show that at a younger age, our youth are more engaged in sexual exploration and self identity. A recent study shows that 30% of millennials identify as LGBTQIA, with just under 30% also identifying as Christians. And I believe that's even higher when it comes to our community here at blackdoctor.org. As more and more millennials, Gen Zers, and other young people continue their development, many come from families where a particular faith or spiritual way of life being a foundation for how their parents or caregivers guided their actions, particularly around sex, sexuality, and identity. And in their development, many have been heavily influenced by their mother or mother figure, who often have also found their solace and guidance from a spiritual belief system. So, as blackdoctor.org joins the HVTN Faith Initiative in recognition of National Youth HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, which was on April 10th, we have invited three amazing Black women to join us this evening to explore the intersectionality of faith, sex, sexuality, and identity, and the impact their faith has had on being a guiding force for them being a guiding force for them in guiding their children. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Pope, a practicing Jehovah's Witness, Bahia Overton, a member of the Baha'i faith, and Kelly Redmond, who identifies as non-denominational with a heavy Christian influence. Good evening, ladies.
Hi.
Evening.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to try and get this HVTN thing out of my face. There we go. So can you ladies briefly tell us about your spiritual belief system and when you started following this path and what attracted you to this path? So we'll start with you, Lisa.
Okay, so as stated, I am a practicing Jehovah's Witness. I was introduced as the only religion that I knew as a child growing up, and so that was the faith that my mother practiced. My father was not a Jehovah's Witness. At the time, I was young. I became a baptized witness at the age of 18, at which time my dad, I think the year after I did, he became a baptized witness as well. I have three siblings, one that became a witness before I did, two that became witnesses after I did. And so we are all, as we said, practicing Jehovah's Witnesses. And sometimes people have conflicting views or understandings of who Jehovah's Witnesses are and what the belief is. So I can share a little bit more of that. But fundamentally, we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that God's name is Jehovah, and we worship Jehovah. And one of the things that Jesus did when he was on earth was that he witnessed and he ministered. And so that's one of the practices that we follow. Fundamentally, that's all we follow. That's the only tradition that we adhere to. But yeah, so that's a quick synopsis.
Thank you for sharing. And Bahia?
Okay, so I'm a Bahia the Baha'i. I was, it's fun. But I have been, my parents were both Baha'is when I was born. But our spiritual practice is that at the age of maturity, which is 15, is when you declare your faith. So you're supposed to go through a process of independent investigation of truth. So I spent a lot of time my 14th year visiting my friends' churches, synagogues, mosques, studying, connecting. The Baha'is believe the three major beliefs of the Baha'i faith. When I was growing up, my mom called them the three onenesses when I was a kid. So the one is that Baha'is believe that there's one God and that this it's like the sun that shines everywhere, right? And that one God cannot shine everywhere, but only in your church or only in your mosque or only in your temple, right? But that there are that God made himself manifest to human beings at different places in the world at different times. And based on people's ability to handle the message and how they translate that into social action is really how people have divided themselves. There's one God, right? And then that essentially, because there's one God, religion is essentially one. The foundations of all faiths is the same in terms of love, compassion, forgiveness, grace. Nobody kind of says, we have a religion, forget that. Give that love over there. We don't do that. Everybody believes in those things. And what usually changes is how you pray, where you pray, what you wear, what you eat, what you don't eat. Those are the social teachings that usually have people the greatest amount of consternation when they're talking to other people of other faiths. And so for me, I became a Baha'i at 15 because I felt like it was, the last one is men and women are equal, which in the world of religion is kind of an unheard of thing. They're different, but it's kind of compared to the wings of a bird of humanity. And so that both wings have to be equally weighted if the bird is to ascend. And so the idea that they're not the same, but they're equal. And so those onenesses stood out to me, and it made me feel like I was connected to people of other faiths. I didn't feel like I was separate from them in this faith. So that I think is what drew me to it. So I declared that belief at 15. And so I've been here ever since.
And Kelly?
Wow. It's such a blessing to be here. I was actually raised Catholic. My father was Catholic, Irish Catholic at that, and my mother grew up in the Black Christian faith tradition. But my mother had really what seemed to be a non-traditional approach to her faith, and I didn't really know or understand, and I'm still learning about it. But I was socialized and went to Catholic school, and it was in high school when one of our religion classes we had to learn about all of the different religions. And growing up in both the Black church and Catholic church, that was in a very multicultural neighborhood in Hyde Park, Chicago, I just was exposed to lots of different things and belief systems. And so I was very open, and I'm like, okay, well, what's right? What's wrong? And so I spent a lot of time during, my childhood and going into my adulthood, having a strong faith. We had some life circumstances where I got to know God on a very personal level at 5 years old when my brother was misdiagnosed at the age of 2. And I remember that's my earliest remembrance of my personal relationship with God is praying for my brother to not only survive, but to return to his normal life, which did not happen. And so I really kind of struggled because I knew throughout my childhood, I believed in God. I wanted to please God. I went to great lengths to please him based on the things that I was hearing. And I was hearing similar things in both environments, but it was delivered, a little differently. So in high school, as I'm learning about faith, I'm like, wow. I kind of like with the bi-hyphen, what you just shared, Bahia, I'm like, we're all kind of believe the same thing. It's just depending on who founded the religion and how they practice it. And so that's always been a part of, my makeup. Like, we're all more similar than we are different if you are a person of faith and believe in God. And so, but I continued with the Catholic faith because that was what I knew, and I felt, and I found some Black Catholic churches. So then I got a little bit of both. So when I moved to Atlanta, we had a gospel choir in 7th grade, so that made St. Thomas a little, more like me. And then went to high school, and it was downtown, Chicago on the Gold Coast. It was very, very Irish Catholic. And then, but I found my best friend's church in high school, which was, on Roosevelt Road in Chicago, and they had praise dance and gospel choir. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I like, So I found my way finding places where I felt I could live, and where I was fed and, accepted, and my culture was a part of it. So I did the same in Atlanta, but when I realized, I'm getting a little personal, but this is what this is about. The day I realized my marriage was over, I went to the Catholic church that I belonged to. There was a different priest. It was a real Irish Catholic priest who was over the church, where there had been Black pastors, believe it or not, in a Catholic church. And I knocked on the door, and they, in the rectory, after hours, having this extreme personal emergency, and they didn't answer. So I said, you know what? I'm leaving the Catholic faith and him both tonight. Like, I'm done. And so I have been supplementing going to different churches and different Bible studies, but that was just what I needed in order to move forward and kind of break free. And I was 32, turning 33 at the time. And since then, I have been trying to find the faith that fits me. I joined Apostolic, which is a Pentecostal Assemblies of the World church. And I'm like, okay, this feels like home. But when they started talking PAW stuff, I'm like, that's a big deal. I don't know if I'm going all into that, but I feel at home and fed here. And, definitely the message of, grace, letting go of that Catholic guilt helped me in some phase. But
PAW. What is PAW? I'm sorry.
Pentecostal Assemblies of the World.
Oh, PAW. Okay. I didn't know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And had no idea. And from that point, in the couldn't, there were some of the things you couldn't wear this, couldn't do this, that, and I'm like, okay. But then our bishop started changing some of those things because he was over the PAW, and then he moved away from the PAW. Then I moved to Los Angeles and West Angeles, which was a Kojic church, so Christian, I can't even remember the acronym.
Church of God in Christ.
Church of God in Christ.
Church of God in Christ.
And then actually, I was felt home there, but then I started hearing some things. And quite honestly, something that was said over the pulpit about homosexuality at a conference, it just really rubbed me the wrong way. And I was already searching. My daughter needed something different. And so I'm like, I'm going to start, going somewhere else. I went to Faithful Central in LA, which was non-denominational. And then the veil really came up there. I was just like, oh my, I started just seeing so many issues and so many discrepancies and double standards. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I believe? This place that I was going to, that for healing and acceptance and support and a way to, like you said, be a part of social action, because I chose churches to be a part of that were really about helping others and going through this entire metamorphosis. And my daughter is watching all of this because I was pregnant when I went to that church that night, that Catholic church in Atlanta, and decided to divorce them and my ex-husband at the same time. So it has been quite a journey. Right now, I'm approaching 55. I'm like, I'm not really into labels. Into anything. I'm still discovering who I am and what I believe. And I think if more people were open to just, and nobody has a license on absolute truth. Nobody knows it. So we're all trying to figure it out and just do the best we can and hold on to some belief that keeps us going. And in a higher power, God, whatever people call him, I call him God. I rely on we can look to all the religious leaders for wisdom and examples and strength. And I'm just not into limiting myself, anymore. And this is kind of my coming out party, because a lot of my friends, I haven't even had this conversation. You're not Christian? I am Christian, but I'm a lot of other things, and I believe a lot of other things. So there we have it.
That was very interesting. Thank you, ladies. I don't think I've ever had that discussion with any of my friends, but that's very interesting. So each of you, besides Bahia, have one child, all daughters, correct?
Correct.
Now, Kelly and Lisa, as strong women of faith, talk to us about when and how you approach the conversation about sex with your daughters. Lisa, you can go first.
For me, I have a very interesting, I think I gave a quick synopsis of my relationship with the Kingdom Hall and Jehovah's Witnesses. But it hasn't always been gravy, and it hasn't been like this, everybody likes to think that everything is good and there's no, there are no issues. I had issues, lots of issues. I had issues that I always had. And I hate to call myself rebellious, but I had to accept that I probably was a little rebellious in that I had questions. And so in my having questions as a young, so I grew up in a household, I was the only girl until my sister was born and she was 12. So there was this exposure, and I had a very devout mother. So I'm a practicing Jehovah's Witness, but my mother's a devout Jehovah's Witness. I think it's a difference in the two. And in her practicing, everything was black and white. There were no gray patches. Everything was black and white. It was, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. And I was the why kid. Why? Like, so why? So where you get that from? How so that was my thing. And so it kind of, in the organization, I became labeled as like a little bit of bad association, a questionable association, because, that period of time was a period of, you don't question things. You just, this is the truth. You accept it, and that's that. Whereas I matured, I got pregnant out of wedlock with my daughter when I was 19. And I had her at 20. So I got pregnant at 19, turned 20. And so I had her when I was 20 years old. And this was definitely against everything that I had been taught as a Jehovah's Witness. And it was a situation where we had to be, I had to go before the elders, have a conversation with them about what had transpired and that, everything that happened. I was not disfellowshipped or expelled from the congregation at that time because of me getting pregnant. So that experience was great. Everybody embraced my daughter. It was a beautiful thing. And so I had this very heavy weight on me that I wanted to make sure that the things that I experienced that were negative things, she would never experience them. So I took on a different level of protection that wasn't a religious protection. It was a mother-daughter, this is the rebirth of me protection. And I wanted her to be protected the way that I felt like I wasn't protected, in the ways that I wasn't, given a fair chance to question and to be free to do that. And so that's what I wanted to do for her. So our journey together was a very intentional one. I never wanted to have kids. And when I got pregnant with her, I toyed with the idea of having an abortion. And I did not. Her father and I were not together. He wasn't the love of my life or anything like that. And so he would have probably been absolutely fine had I had terminated this pregnancy. But there was something in my conversation with God that was like, no, you're going to have this baby and she's going to change your life. And she changed my life. And so in doing that, I had to figure out whether I was going to, stay where I was or whether I was going to do other things. So there was a period of time, probably when she was around 4 or 5, that I left what was my hometown in Augusta, and I moved to Atlanta. So about 10 years I was inactive. So I would go to, like, maybe once a year, we have a memorial celebration. That's the anniversary of Jesus Christ's death. I would always make those meetings. But the devout in the ministry, I wasn't doing that. And so in that window of time, I explored a lot of things. So that was also the time that my daughter was developing. So in her development, when she was in elementary school, I knew that as the only girl, I had challenges of, like, nobody talked to me about sex. Nobody talked to me about these feelings that I had, and nobody talked to me about, anything. I didn't have a clue. It was just like me and my friends figuring life out. And I kind of found myself in different family in households where conversations were happening. And I had what I knew was what the scriptures said. And so I had that basis. And so as my daughter was coming up, it was intentional. I'm like, look, you're going to have a menstrual cycle. When you do, this is what you need to do. And I was talking to a guy friend of mine yesterday and explaining to him, I was like, yeah, look, because girls start so soon now, or just varied ages. When she was in elementary school, I will never forget. I'm like, I'm going to give you a purse and I'm going to put a panty liner in your purse. And I want you to dismiss yourself to go to the restroom in the middle of the school day, and you go. And so I was kind of training her in the behaviors of womanhood when she was young. Well, my daughter never had a menstrual cycle. She never had a cycle, because we found out at 16 that she has I don't even know what to call it, a disorder. She has a blessed experience that she doesn't have a vagina. She doesn't have a vagina. She didn't have a uterus, but she did have ovaries. We found out at age of 16. It's a disorder called vaginal agenesis. 1 in 5,000 girls is born with some form of it. So this was like, whoa. like everything that we were planning, this is not a part of the scope at all. Like, how are we gonna deal with this? And of course, when I told my mom, she, because of the way she had been indoctrinated, just don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Don't you dare tell somebody that she has, we don't have these conversations about it. I'm like, oh, absolutely not. We're telling everybody. I'm like, girl, she got vaginal agenesis. She don't need to have a vagina. She got to go, it was. And so I wanted her to be comfortable with whatever these life nuances were going to be. And so that began our conversations about sex and about sexuality and about her womanhood and about her being a woman and a girl, or all the things that she was going to, that were going to happen in her life. And that was during a period of time where I was searching and I was still figuring out, but I had a foundation. I knew what the Bible said, regardless of what people interpreted or how they used it to manipulate. I knew what the word of God was. And so I think that was the leveling field that I had. And so it turned into a beautiful journey, because there was something that was so disrupting that happened at age of 16. It became an opportunity for us to bond, for us to really have conversations that I don't think that I ever would have had those conversations, because it wouldn't have been necessary to talk about your whole, how you're made and how, your body is created. It became a very interesting journey. So that was the beginning of that journey, our conversation about sex.
Oh.
Wow. Now that you had a whole extra layer.
Yes. I had a friend of mine who had something similar growing up, actually.
It was my mentor, one of her first cases as a resident. That's what it was. That was one of her cases. And the young lady, the young lady decided to have my mentor as her physician. So me as a medical student, the patient came in. So I got to meet her and talk to her about it. And yeah, it was really fascinating for me as a medical student, of course, because I never heard of, never seen. And she was really nice. She was a young Black girl, really nice. And, like I said, she just met her as a resident, but decided she wanted that to be her physician. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. And so, Kelly?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. It's been amazing.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting how we can't really tell the story about our daughters until we tell our story about, what happened to us. And so, me being trying to be the best good Catholic girl I could be, and then being told around the age 12 in Catholic school that premarital sex was the worst sin that could be committed unto God. And I held on to that. Absolutely. Into my 20s, and I was doing my best to be a virgin. I did just about everything except penetration as I got into my mid-20s. But I'm like, I'm a virgin, I'm trying to hold on. I ended up choosing the wrong spouse because we were dating, he was playing basketball overseas, and he flew me to Argentina, and I was there, and we're just having fun. And again, I was doing close to everything, but I wasn't ready and we had an understanding. Somehow it happened. I didn't go into it saying, I'm ready for this is what's gonna happen, but it happened. I'll leave it there. And then after that, I'm like, well, I have to make this right. And at this point, he had been the best. He had treated me the best from what I could in my dating experience. Because most of my dating, nobody wanted to really be with me or be with me long because I wasn't having sex. So I had very limited options.
Right.
So that's the choice, that I made. And that's why I'm like, okay, I've got to get, away from this. So, but as I mentioned earlier, I turned to the church, and just a different faith that was, also very restrictive in what you could do and couldn't do and this and that, especially around sex. And so I found myself a born again virgin after marriage, after not really having a good sex life, even married. So I'm like, well, I waited all this time. There were some health issues that prevent, so it was not on my side, but it was like, oh my God, what, so I waited, I did all, as close as I could. And still, there was no reward for that. And I'm like, okay. So as my daughter was growing up, I have her in the church where, she's in church. She's actually, while I'm in the choir, she's at rehearsal, praise dancing all just breaking out. So introducing her to God through music and, praise dance, all of that played a part. And at a very young age, she was very anti-male. And I'm like, uh-oh. I'm like, what is this? She's like, oh, boys, yeah, no. And I'm like, no, Jada, they're good. It's okay. So I wasn't sure what she was going to be or identify as or choose to love. And then as time went on and, and early on, I was trying to influence it. Oh, isn't he cute? So eventually, when she got to high school, well, actually, let me just say, because my daughter is tall, like me, beautiful, she developed early. I had to tell her, so this is part of the sex talk, 9 years old, 10 years old, because grown men were hitting on her. So I had to have this talk, like how to talk to guys who were trying to talk to you inappropriately because you're, young and they're too old. So I was like, when they ask you, what's your name? I said, I'm 9 years old. And walk away. So that was our first sex talk. I'm 10, leave me alone. I'm 12, I'm 15, I'm 18, I'm 19, 20. Okay, you're 21 now.
Right.
But leading up to that. So she did, she was growing older, decided she liked boys, and she was in performing arts programs. So there weren't a lot of straight guys around, but she had friends that were, all along the spectrum of LGBTQIA, all around her every day. In her high school yearbook, someone wrote something in there that seemed like she had changed her sexuality, and I actually brought it to her attention, but we talked through it. So I think I'm getting ahead, but what I will say is we, all along the way, school definitely helped because they definitely teach sex ed in schools. And I would also try to share things before school and then supplement, clarify, and be as open as possible to talk about anything. And that is what has kind of kept our relationship good and strong. And so over time, and she didn't have a whole lot of questions, and she still hasn't had as a 21-year-old, a lot of experiences. So she knows that I've been here, I'm still here whenever, she learns, and she knows about safe sex. I ask her, you know about this, you know about that, she's like, yes. So here we are.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So Bahia, can you chime in now? Because I'm sure there's a difference in timing and approach when it comes to a son versus a daughter.
It's interesting because, well, first I have to say that my mom growing up, she realized that in our religious community, people weren't talking about anything either. And really, they didn't understand anything about the body. And that was something. So my mother used to teach human sexuality around my city. So my mother was the sex ed lady, right? Everybody was like, your mom, I could tell you about a 10-second erection when I was like 7. I'm the kid that there was never a pet name. It was like penis, vagina, from very early. It was not like, you got to go there was none of that kind of language. My mom didn't use any of those kind of
mother's the same way.
Right. Now, so my mother was the sex. So then in the Bahia community, part of the chastity conversation, to be chaste, is a spiritual quality, right? Modest and chaste. And so she became the chastity lady, which is very embarrassing because that means she's having the chastity talks with all the youth, right? When I was growing up, like, oh God, we don't want to talk about this with them, but seriously don't want to have my mother going. But what really they were was, it was kind of a covert way that she got to be able to talk about human sexuality, to be able to name the sex organs, which all the boys could always name everything on themselves and on women, but the girls could never name everything on their own body. And she's like, that is insane. The boys know everything. You don't know anything about your own body. So a lot of it was education. And then it was the idea of what is appropriate, right? My mom was not an ordinary youth. My mother was not silly and lighthearted. My mother was always deep. She became a Bahia at 14 years old from being AME. And because she read 100 Bahia books, she was odd. She was actually voted most unusual student in high school. And we got married at 17, had to have special permission from the state to marry my father, who was 6 years older than her. But my father also said I was marrying a 17-year-old who wasn't like a 17-year-old, right? Because she's always been very, so even though my mom had me at 19, I was born to a teenage mom. My mother now in her 60s is a much lighter, brighter, fun spirit. My mother was deep, okay, from the very beginning. So being a child, like my mother told me when I was 7, if you ever exalt yourself above another human being, you're actively working against the cause of God. That's a very heavy thing for a 7-year-old. Right? But this is what I'm saying. So I didn't grow up in a house where and nothing was serious. Everything was serious. And so I remember one of my friends said to her, sex is just sex. And she said, yeah, if you're a pig. Right? Sex is just sex if you're a pig. So we started to get into the spiritual component of what makes us different from the animals, our spirit, our conscience, the impact of connecting with human beings in a way that there's no commitment, right? What does that do to your spirit, kind of a thing? And so that was kind of the on top of the you better not vibe. So I had a lot of conversation with you better not as part of it. So it wasn't really that expressive. And I remember specifically thinking about having sex with my boyfriend at the time, long-term boyfriend. I was in college and I was contemplating this. And I remember thinking, gosh, every time he comes here, it's more of a right to visit me. And I'm like, I don't want to be like these, Bahia girls who are like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then they end up pregnant. I was like, kept thinking, I don't want to be that. And I told my mom, I said, I remember telling her the spiritual repercussions of breaking the chastity law would exert its influence on my spirit, I'm sure. However, being the eldest girl and my younger cousins are all looking at me, my brothers are all looking at me. If I get pregnant, they're not going to think they have a chance. I'm like the golden child, right? So if she can't do it, I said, I think the spiritual ramifications of that is worse. And so for me, I was like, I want to be responsible for my own spirituality and flaws, but not for impacting them with my flaws. And so, she didn't like that, but she was like, I guess that's responsible. But you're planning to break the law. Bahia. I'm like, I know, but I'm just, and so that was part of me too. I thought, okay, now I have to marry this man. This is what I got to do. Now that I've done this thing, my mother was a virgin, she got married. My grandma was a virgin when she got married. So now I've got to make this right and marry this person. And it almost worked. I was married to him for nearly 19 years, almost 20 years. It wasn't a bad, I didn't that was the wrong thing. But if I could go back, I realized with my daughter, I did not want her to make decisions that way. Right. And so we started from the beginning. And also I realized that my mom telling me, you better not, you got married at 17. You don't have a whole lot of time. You waited, lady. But I thought about it later. I was like, wait a minute. You got married at 17. Hold on. I'm like, go. So that was the other thing. I had to figure that out. But I told my daughter, the protection in the law is that you are in kind of God's hands. Basically, you won't have to worry about getting pregnant. You don't have to worry about getting STD. You don't have to worry about people talking bad about you. All these things you don't have to worry about if you stay inside the hands. But when you go outside of the law, the hands just aren't there. You're not going to get smited down, but they're just not there. So it's not for you to be the destruction of you. You're going to be pushed down. Something bad's going to happen to you. It's that you can't be protected. I said, and so what all the faiths really try to tell you around the chastity, really it's around, this is what we know. This is where we know is safe. And you go outside of that, we don't know. It doesn't mean that you're terrible, and so my framing for my daughter was really around make decisions that are worthy of you. And if you find that you've made a decision that's not worthy of you, don't make that decision again. It's instead of now you're ruined and you're done. You know what I'm saying? And you better figure it out or fix it, which is what I kind of internalized myself. And so in talking with my son, I had a very similar conversation. You're a spiritual person first, right? Just because someone allows you to do something, or just because people tell you it's okay, you have to be able to determine for yourself what's healthy for you. Especially as my son is a very sensitive son, very, very sensitive. And so, he didn't tell me everything. He tells me more than she does. My daughter currently is still a virgin. We have this whole conversation about that plan going into college. And, I told her, I'm going to send a vibrator with you. And she's like, good God, Mom, good God. I was like, listen to my reasoning. I said, okay, you're growing. You've never had sex. You're going into a place where you're going to a black college. I went to black college. It's beautiful black men everywhere, right? And going and hanging out with people, there's a lot that can come up for you. However, if you're cool, you take care of yourself before you go out on your dates, you are not going to be as pent. You'll be able to make a clear, informed decision. And she's like, oh my God, that is just so ridiculous. I'm like, I hear what you're saying. Hear me out. So whether or not you won't ever have to use it, can stay in the box. But I'm sending you something because I told you there's nothing safer for you, And so I think that conversation, I mean, she's always like, my son is really the one that's like, we had a conversation with his girlfriend when I realized they were having sex. And I'm like, what are we doing? And what are your expectations of her? And what are your expectations of him? Because clearly you guys are having sex. Like I just, what are we doing? And she's like, well, I'm on birth control and this is what, and then we went through the whole thing and we're going to be together forever. Of course, they both were like, enmeshed, and they still are enmeshed. They're very, but the conversation was around, and I told her, I took her aside, and she currently lives with my ex-husband and him. But I told her, I said, this is all I'm going to say about this. I don't want your housing to be tied to your relationship. And I feel like if you want to leave my son alone, you should be able to do that and be okay. And so what I'm going to tell you is if at any point you don't want to be in this situation, but you don't have the support of your family, or you need to call me. I will help you. Right now, I love my son. She loves him, but I just, as a woman, wanted her to know, because she didn't get any of that guidance from her. That if you don't want to be with him, you should always feel empowered to not have to be, just to keep your roof over your head. You know what I'm saying? So the conversations with them has been more on the empowering side, but keep it real side. Like, I can't help your way in if you can't keep it real with me. We can't be honest. And so, and there's real reasons for why we have these spiritual laws. And it's not to hurt you. It's really to keep you safe.
Mm-hmm. Bahia, can I say something, Renee?
Yes, go ahead.
You just said that so beautiful. You talked about so many different things. But one thing I wanted to layer in is when we talk about why we save ourselves, one thing that I came to on my own, because I had made this choice because of the don't do. But I also, as I was growing up as a teenager, young adult, etc., I started realizing, I'm like, these men don't have power over me because I have not given all of me to them. And I saw the reactions that my friends were having. Sometimes I knew they were having, I didn't, but I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't doing drive-bys. I wasn't doing, I was always able to hold on to my sanity because I was in control of all of me.
Right.
My little feelings may have been hurt a little bit, but it didn't go too deep. I waited till my 50s to have that experience, but I needed to have it, and I'm grateful for it. That I finally had that connection that I'm like, wow, I actually feel heartbroken because I had just not ever given my whole self. And that's part of the spiritual protection that they should talk more about as to why.
Right.
Because it is important. You mentioned, Lisa, you were always asking the why. I wasn't asking the why. I was just trying to do what they said. Okay, check. But it was bottled up within me for so long. And then finally, as I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, I'm looking at people who are making these choices. And then they have this Christian fairy tale around, marriage and courtship. And I'm like, but only less than 1% has that Christian fairy tale. So what, am I just supposed to sit here alone and be unhappy and not have sex at all? And I'm like, I'm sorry, 40. I'm like, okay, I got to do something different. And then my doctor told me I had fibroids that were very large. And if she's like, when was the last time? I said, oh, it's been a while. I'm abstaining. And she's like, why? I'm like, because of my faith. Why? Like, your body needs this. This is important. And I'm like, oh my God, So I'm like, after that, it was like, doctor's orders. I'm like, but I still was like, I know what the hurt can be like. So I'm like, I don't really want to be hurt and play with my heart like that.
Right.
Like I no longer had the, oh no, because of the church. It's like, oh no, my body needs this too. And everybody has to find their way.
Right.
But it's great when we can guide our children and young adults and peers, our friends, because there's women there, especially older Black women who are still struggling with this and not free and not living a full life because men are telling them what to do with their bodies in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way that Bahia put it too. That was very eloquent. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. So now shifting gears a bit, I mentioned the stats in terms of the number of young people that identify as LGBTQIA+. Can we talk a bit about where your faith journey plays a role in sexual orientation and the idea that your child, though steeped in faith tradition they may have been raised in, that they may identify differently from their birth identity? Let's talk about that. So how does your faith play a role in the acceptance of your child?
I'll go.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when I grew up in Chicago, I love music and dancing. And so I snuck into the house clubs as an early teenager. And I guess Chicago, being a little bit, more free. So I knew people on the whole LGBTQIA we didn't have all those terms or whatever, but I just loved everyone. I'm like, that's the command. Love everyone. And not just love them the way you want to be loved, love them the way they want to be loved. And so, I never had a fear of LGBTQIA. I never, we're all people, we all have different likes and lifestyles, etc. So, my daughter, when she went to school, and like I said, being in theater, performing arts, she was exposed to a lot, very early. And so she has actually helped me learn and grow because some of her friends, like there was a friend who became non-binary, and I still kind of struggle with, it just takes time to learn. And when you're not in an environment where you're able to practice the vocabulary and the language all the time, but there was literally a period, and this was just a couple of years ago, it was during the pandemic, and we were talking about this friend of hers, and I was trying to get it right, and I was saying, we talking, and I said something wrong later, but a year later, and then one time I just started crying. I'm like, I'm really trying. But I'm like, I really want to get it right. I really want to get it right. I want to call people what they want to be called, pronounce their names properly. It just all fits in with all of that. And I'm grateful for our children's generation who are learning and having to teach us older people some things. And I just encourage our peer group and just to be open to that and open to accepting. I have friends who I believe may be LGBTQIA somewhere that have never told me. And I want them to tell me. I want them to feel free and open enough to talk to me about it. I've had other friends say, oh, they're such a leader. I said, I don't know what they are, and I don't care. Until they tell me they're just a human being, and I don't, their sexuality doesn't matter to me, so that's kind of my perspective on it. So,
I would say it's difficult because I think when you're in a faith community, like what I explained to my daughter when she was young, because, I live in Portland, Portland is like we've been talking about organics since the early 70s. Like this has been like everybody else on this new organics. We've been on that, okay, for quite some time. So we're very earthing granola over here, right? So everything is kind of an interesting, you just got to be down with the earthy granola, really. But what's interesting, so my daughter was about second grade, and she came to me and she said, so Mom, I want to ask you a question. And I was like, what? She's like, my teacher, she loved this teacher. And I said, yeah. She's like, well, she said she was getting married, and then we were like decorating her desk for her wedding. And then we said, who are you getting married to? And then she points to this picture and it was the boy girl, right? She said, right, talking about somebody who's non-binary, right? It was the boy girl. And isn't that weird? And can I still like her? And I said, here's what I feel about it, right? Because when you have any faith, you have a set of standards, right? That you're supposed to live by. And so here I am wanting to uphold the standard, right? And also not make my daughter think I'm a bigot, like against. So I said, listen, okay. So you know how there's two things. We have been given in our faith this like wonderful recipe, like a cookie recipe, right? And it's like, if you want the perfect cookie every time, you cook it at this temperature, you put these ingredients in, this is how you're going to get the perfect cookie. And every time we eat that cookie, we're like, this is the perfect cookie. We love this cookie. And then someone comes along and says, I make my cookie with walnuts. Now we're like, walnuts? Oh, that's not the perfect, that's not a perfect recipe. I said, and so for us, we may not like that recipe, but if that recipe works for them, that's their recipe, right? We're not going to come and tell them. What they're not going to tell us is that we have to start eating walnuts, because I'm not going to do that. I don't have to tell you about your walnuts, but you don't get to make me eat your walnuts, right? I said, so the reality is, it's just like this. If I see something that I don't really vibe with, I said, you know what we don't really vibe with? One of our brothers smoked cigarettes at the time. I said, do we like that Uncle Hassan smoked cigarettes? We're really not down with the cigarette smoking. But we don't say, you're a smoker, so you can't come around. You know what I'm saying? We love him. I said, and so my whole thing is you get to be you and love everyone else. You get to, if I tell my friends in the community, I said, listen, if I feel like this is the recipe for the movement for an ever advancing civilization, if I think that this is the recipe for that, just like I think that the most ideal situation is for two parents of opposite sex to raise their children. Ideally, single parents raise their children, grandmas raise their children. All these things are possible, but I get to hold on to what I think is my ideal. It doesn't mean that I go, oh, you're terrible. You're a single mom. You're a grandmother raising your child. You're a gay mother raising your child, right? But I don't believe in is doing that. But I get to hold on to my recipe. And so for me, in explaining to my children, we get to hold this as our faith practice. What I'm not going to do is use that to harm you, use that to make you feel like less of a human being as you walk away from me. And you're not going to impress that onto me that I'm somehow flawed because this is the recipe that I choose. I said, and so maintaining that balance is really important because one of my very, very good friends is always like, you always strike me as it's hard because you're a very religious person and yet I don't feel put upon by you because I'm very embracing, but it doesn't mean that I get to have to change my recipe. And that's the part that I think that people of faith struggle with is that they don't know how to, like with the pronouns, right? My mom is like, a lot of older Black people are like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And I go, listen, I understand as Black people, we're tired of adjusting to everybody else's stuff. Adjust. Nobody adjusts for us. We got to adjust for everybody. And they get tired. I said, so I appreciate that you don't want to. But May 9th, when I get this PhD, you will adjust and call me doctor. If I get married, you will adjust and call me by my new last name, right? Or whatever. So we can do it. You can. I can appreciate why you don't want to, but you have the capacity. And if you decide you want to call me a Negro, I get to say, no, you don't get to call me a Negro. That's not what I'm going to let you call me. And because of that, I'm willing to extend myself to call you what you want to be called. I don't have to believe in everything that you believe in. I don't have to be down with all the recipes that you are putting my way. I don't have to. But I'm not going to disparage you as a human being, as a person of faith. I don't ever want someone to walk away from me, that exalting myself above you and you're human. We had one of my daughter's friends. She was having a sleepover and all of a sudden I saw the boy's name pop up and I was like, wait, who's this? Who's this? She's like, he's certified gay. Right? So I was like, certified. But either way, this is a beautiful child, and okay. Do you know what I'm saying? So we in trying to expand, we get to hold our truth and be embracing and supportive. And so that's the part that I've tried to balance with them. But it's a challenge, It's a challenge.
I think that is absolutely fantastic. I think that I think that that Bahia has really like put into words, like my sentiments and my feelings in my life. Okay, so y'all ready for the next wow factor? Because every time you come to me, it's a wow factor, right? So the wow factor for me is my first. I'm sitting here like they are not ready. Like everybody's
I'm
always
ready.
like,
I'm ready. I'm on the edge of my seat
because you're so honest. Yeah. So my first sexual encounter was with a female who was a friend of mine, a family friend, and she also went to the Kingdom Hall that I went to, and it was she was a little older than me. It was a relatively consensual, but I did not want to participate. I consented to it because she was somebody that I was very endearing towards, and I wanted to please her because I thought that when you had friends or when you like people, you do whatever they want because that's how you this is how you garner their friendship and you show your love for people, right? So this is my first encounter, and I was probably 12 or 13 years old. So this had the ability to disrupt everything that everything that I knew. And so the little girl that was always asking why is now experiencing something that's all outside of the scope of everything. And so as I matured and as I grew up, I kind of put it away, put it someplace that I did not even recognize this to be reality for 20 years. So for 20 years, I buried this experience, right? And so fast forward, I go through all of these, different things in my life, and I'm just a very happy person, but my emotional development stopped at the age where my innocence was disrupted by this action. Well, as I matured and started therapy and going through some things, I realized that there was something that was affecting this family, a sexual demon that was affecting that whole family. And so it wasn't just the girl, just my friend that was the female. Her brother had also done inappropriate things. It was an environment of that. But it was a protected environment because you don't talk about it. You don't talk about this. Don't you dare say something bad about one of the brothers or one of the sisters. And, it was this protected environment. And so I was like, look at here. What I'm not about to do is protect people while I'm unprotected. Like all bets are off. Like, I'm not that girl. So there was a part of me that became very, just very ambitious and very intentional. But I also had so much love that I say all the time that I was born into a river of love that I didn't even know, because everything that I experienced in my life was in opposition to that. Everything was to take away from that or to discourage me from being that person. And I was like, against all odds, I'm going to love you regardless. So with that happening years later, because we were family friends, my mom, this is her best friend to this day. And the young lady, this is her mother. And so as the years went on, I remember this young lady asking me, do you like men? Because, we would talk about girl talk and things that we were experiencing. And I had an experience where I had the ability to disconnect sex from relationships. So I could have sex with you and had no emotion attached to it, zero, which was, I thought it was normal because we didn't talk about it anyway. So nobody told me what this experience was supposed to be as a woman. So for me, I had a completely disconnected, and it was a dutiful act. For me, sex was a dutiful act. So for me to do it, I knew that it was wrong, but because I didn't have a desire to, that protected my relationship with God. Because God knew I ain't even really trying to participate in this. I'm just doing it because it was a crazy psychology around this whole experience, right? Meanwhile, I'm still I'm in the beauty industry, so I do hair, and I'm, my job and my responsibility was to love people and to make people feel well and make everybody. So my religious direction was the same. You bring love and you bring, good news to people, and that's your job. And in the beauty industry, I'm going to make you look beautiful and make you feel good about yourself and encourage you. So everything about me fed that part of it. But then there was a part of me that was dying inside because I was having an experience that I could not make sense out of. So at 33, and I say this my Jesus year, at 33, I had a tragic situation happen. I was in a really bad car accident. And so my life stopped. And in the midst of it, I made the decision my daughter was in the 5th grade at the time, that I was going to kill her and I would kill myself that day from school, because I had just kind of I had reached the end of the well. There was nothing left. And when I made that decision, I was like, all right, Jehovah, like, I know you and I love you. Like, this has nothing to do with love and me, the inability or me not wanting to love or I don't love. But if this is not what I'm supposed to do, I need for you to reconcile everything that has happened. So this is year 20 of that window that I blacked out. And at that time, a veil was lifted. The revelation, what that sexual experience was, had happened. The relationships that I was having along the way that were dutiful relationships with people that I had no emotion towards. Like, men were like, yo, like, you a dude. I ain't never seen a girl that like engages men like this, get up the next day and walk off like ain't nothing happened. I'm like, hey, whatever. Like, it was power. So that was a way for me to regain power that I had unwillingly surrendered when I was so young. So I shared this story with my daughter. So I talk about it all the time. Like, yo, like, I was going to kill you, right? I was going to kill you. Now I was going to kill myself. But when that happened, it was a peace. It was almost like I had never seen sunlight. Like, if I lived in Alaska and it's always dark, like that season when it was day, that it was almost like you had never seen it before, and you almost had to, like, stay in the shadows just to kind of get your bearances until you could actually fully encompass it. And that was my life. And so from that moment, I realized, I'm like, two things happened. So later, my daughter ends up with vaginal agenesis. I had been sexually, introduced to a woman, my first experience, and she questioned whether or not I like men. And I'm like, she's like, I don't mean do you like men? I mean, I was like, maybe I don't like men. And I'm like, but I don't like women. And so I'm so confused. I was just so confused, because I'm like, yeah, no, this ain't making sense to me. So when the revelation happened, it became more clear to me, like, kind of what all of these traumas that I had experienced had made me into this person that I was confused about. I was confused about who she was, why she was. I definitely didn't fit at the Kingdom Hall, because all that I was having, if somebody else is having that experience, they would never tell it. At least nobody would say. So then I started telling everybody at the Kingdom Hall. I'm like, girl, let me tell you what happened. My first sexual encounter was with, and they like, oh Lord, like, she is way. I'm like, no, I'm gonna tell you everything. Like, it all happened. So then I started to have this part of me that had empathy for people who had physical things that didn't make them normal. Like, my daughter she can't have her own children. So everything about her being a woman in the process of womanhood, she didn't have that.
Right.
So how can you judge? How do you look at people and think anything? And so I started, I always embraced people. I always embraced people of all sorts. In the beauty industry, we had people, my first, like, the way I learned how to do makeup was my drag queen friends who, like, girl, come on, let me show you. It was, and they were loving and they were great people. And I was like, how do I judge a person based on their actions and not based on who they are? So for me, it became this delve into people. Like, when I meet Kelly and Bahia and Dr. Renee, it's not, I don't want to know about your behavior, because 99% of the times the behavior is not a reflection of the person. 99% it was not. And so when I learned that, it took my whole religious and my spiritual development and my spiritual into a whole nother level. And so my daughter looks at me as the example for her of who you're supposed to be in whatever level of spirituality, because she's like, oh, my mom gonna love you and feed you. You can come here and you're gonna experience love and you're gonna be received and you're gonna be okay. She is not gonna go along with your bad behavior. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna peel it back. We're gonna figure out if this is really what you want to do or is this something else. And then we're all gonna be happy. You're gonna leave here better off than you came. And if you don't, then I had no purpose in coming across your path. If you leave my presence and it's not better than when you came. So that became my whole plight. And that spiritual journey gave me grace to give. So that was really,
that is
like,
deep.
my wow factor for y'all.
So that is so amazing. That's just an illustration of transformation, spiritual transformation, right? And how do you not feel that God is pleased with you?
Exactly.
When you are loving someone. That's the thing that I think that is hard for me when I'm talking to religious folks, right? Yeah. It's like, if you're not loving on people, how do you feel spiritually correct about that? If you're condemning people, how do you feel spiritually correct about that?
Correct.
And that's the part, it's the antithesis of the spirit. It's the opposite, you know. It's like,
sense.
you know, I always say that my grandmother was I'm very close to her. She's my favorite person. She died in 2017. My grandmother, she was such a good Christian. I used to always say she ruined me on Christians, because when I was a kid, my grandmother had 2 sons, and both of her sons became Baha'is, and all her grandchildren are Baha'is. So my dad said, it must be so strange for her. We're not coming back. You know, but my grandmother, we'd go to Detroit every summer to be with her. And my grandfather was a pastor too. So my grandmother called my grandfather Reverend my whole life. Reverend, do you want some coffee? Reverend. I was always called Reverend. So my grandmother, it was 6 of us at the time. My dad had 3 kids, and my uncle had 3 girls. And so we would go there every summer and spend the summer with my grandma. So she was always like, okay, your dad sent your Baha'i prayer book. You know what my favorite prayer in the Baha'i prayer book is? And we would just read the prayer. She would never go, well, you're at my house, so when you're at my house, you're gonna do what I'm gonna do. That crazy mess your dads are doing. You know, she never did that. And then she'd go, oh, this is a beautiful prayer. Let's do this one, right? And she always would practice with us. And then she told us one day, okay, we're going to take you, I'm going to go to church today, but I can take you to the Baha'i Center after, or you can go to church with me, whatever you want to do. So we're like, we don't know these Baha'is out here. We're going to go to church with you. So we went to church with her. And it was the first time any of us had ever heard the idea that if you weren't saved in Christ, you were doomed. Like we knew all about Christianity growing up. We knew about, and my grandma was a Christian. We knew that our family was Christian, and it was so loving and supportive. So anyway, we're all in the car like this. Like, we don't want to say anything. But we're like, what? Does grandma think this about us? Does she think we're doomed? Like, we're like sitting there like, oh my God. And so my grandma's like looking at us in the rearview mirror, like, and so she says, hey, you know, what that pastor said today, I don't believe that. And we're like, you don't? Because we also didn't understand, we don't have clergy in the Baha'i faith. So we didn't understand, like, this is the person. This is like the most important person in here. So for us, we're like, the most important person said this. So what do you believe, you know? And so my grandma was like, somebody tell me how to get to downtown Detroit. And so I was like, you could take the Lodge. And my cousin was like, Outer Drive. And there's like Southfield Freeway. Like, we're all right. She goes, exactly. You ain't gonna tell me there's more ways to get to downtown Detroit than there are to get to God, who's everywhere, right? She goes, no, he ain't told me to do nothing different, so I'm gonna stay where I'm doing. She's like, but, you know, and it was such a lesson for me in her owning what her faith was and what she believed, and it not being counter. It was like, I believe this, I have the truth, and I believe you have some part of the truth. That's not really, I don't really vibe with it, but I believe you have something that is true. And so that vibe for me growing up, with my grandma being my favorite prayer partner, right? And most connected spiritual bond, who was always looking for bridges. I think that there's a biblical story like that Baha'i story. And we would just make these connections, right? And then getting older and being to hell on multiple occasions, multiple years of my life, by people who were saying they were doing it in the spirit of God and faith. And I was just like, my grandma used to always say, I love Christians. I could do without church folks, right? Because she's like, I don't believe it. So for me, that truth of the love that I would always hear my grandma talk about, that Christ lived his love, right? And so, and the least loving people that I had met were Christians at the time. Like, well, they're not very Christ-like, right? Because they're not very loving. And so I feel like the more bridges that we have, we're sitting here coming from multiple faith communities, but understanding how important it is to beam love and light at people. And that love is really being fueled by God. I think that's the lesson. You don't have to agree with what I'm doing. I don't have to agree with what you're doing, but I believe that you're a human being deserving of love and light. So I love the fact that you learn how to do makeup from drag queens, and that you're telling everybody at Kingdom Hall about your experience, and you're manifesting these things for your daughter. I mean, that would be the thing that would make me more inspired to learn about what it is that you say you believe, is how you live what you believe, right?
Okay, so I was impressed about the therapy piece, and I was wondering, were you able to get it when you were younger, or did it come later? Because that's such an important part, I believe, of healing.
It was It was not until that Jesus year, not until 33,
33.
not until 33 that wasn't even a. And it's funny that how I ended up in therapy was a doctor's appointment that I went to. I had gotten pregnant after this tragedy, this terrible car accident, and I was like, I can't have this baby. And I went to terminate this pregnancy. When I went to terminate the pregnancy, I had a follow-up visit with this doctor. And so now I'm living, because at this point I'm like well aware, like, who Jehovah is, and he is not pleased with this, right? And I'm like, there was no question, but I was like, I don't have a choice. So then that was probably where the suicidal, homicidal thoughts came from too, because it was such a level of, failure in some capacity. But I went to a doctor's visit, and she, we could put on a good face. Like, that's your job, is to always look good and to look like nothing's wrong. And you would never have known, like, when I walked out of my house, that it was this dark in my space. And she looked at me and she said, I want to give you a referral. I don't want you to think that I'm calling you crazy or saying anything. I just think you should talk to someone. And I looked at her like, how did you see me? Like, how did you dare see me past all of this? Like, and see that there was something wrong. I don't even remember that lady's name. She was getting ready to move to get married somewhere else, and she completely changed my life. And she was like, it's a mental health referral. I don't want you to feel like it's anything other than, I just think you need to talk to someone. And I was just like, I think I need to talk to someone too. I just broke down. It was over. So then I was like, yeah, I need to, like, I got a lot to offload. Like, it's a lot of stuff coming, and it's coming real fast. I need to offload all of this. But so often people in religious environments don't have a place to offload, not the truth.
Mhm.
You got to say the truth according to how you want people to receive it, so that they don't discard you. And I'm like, there's nothing about that resonates from what I know God to be, what I know scripture to teach. There was and so then I learned, like, it's okay for you to speak up and say, that's not scriptural, that's not acceptable, like, and so I have, it became my voice. Like, the more I learned about God and about the Bible, the more I was able to dispel the people that were doing things that were really hell sent. I feel like they were Satan sent, just to destroy good people, or to make good people feel inadequate. I'm like, just because you make a bad decision, or you have a series of bad decisions, or you are dealing with something that's very complex internally and don't know how to articulate it, it doesn't make you discarded by God. Like, God don't discard you at your worst. He discards you when you discard him. And that's a whole nother level of, relationship with God. And I know very few people who have discarded and disregarded God and said, I don't care. But most people that I encounter, they love God. It's a very complex, and I'm like, he knows everything about you. And I talk to people even today. I'm like, to be able to judge me, you would have to know everything. And I haven't met a person yet that knows everything. It's him and me that know everything. Nobody else, like, you can't even have an opinion about me, because you have no clue, and same. So I look at people and I'm like, I have no clue. I would have to sit down with you and talk to you for 3 years to figure out who you really are and why you did this and what happened before I could judge you, And so that's a saving grace for me, because the opposite of that is just to be that rigid person who reads you by this book. I do believe that we all will be measured by the same measuring block ultimately. Like, when judgment hour comes, whatever you feel that is for you, everybody will be measured the same. And so that measurement, the only difference will be is the condition of your heart. So God's going to go measure your behavior based on your heart, not on just the things that you did, or comparing it to Jane Doe or John Doe, or, but the measuring bar will be the same. So, we all got to get there. Like, you may be slow, you may be one-legged when we get there, but we all gonna get there. And that's all that really is important,
Yes. I think the sooner we can introduce our children to good Black therapists, because, like Renee, I'm all about Black doctors and having a whole Black care team. The sooner that we can connect our children to dealing with the multitude of issues and traumas that come out throughout our lives, that's one of the best gifts that we can give our children, and that, as they're navigating all of these landscapes.
So as we wrap up, we are celebrating National Youth HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. So I want to know from each of you, what did you tell your children as far as practicing safe sex?
Well, from my son, you know, one of the things that we talked about very early, because he had been honest with me about having made a couple of well, basically not protecting himself a couple times, and so I was like, "What?" You know, I think a lot of times boys, you know, I think initially they sometimes think they can tell. Like they look at someone a certain kind of way. And I was like, oh my God, no. I was like, okay. So just keeping it completely real, we were just talking about all the things that could go wrong and why this is not only good for you emotionally, just to be not being discriminate in certain ways, but also what does that mean for your body? And what does it mean for, you know, how long things can stay in your system, how it can affect the rest of your health, right? Sexual health can impact all of your health. And getting to a point where I'm like, all righty, what are our agreements? What are our commitments to this? What is it about being to our own health, not just to our mental health? You know, when I got divorced, it was really, really hard for my children, right? And so how are you processing this? Are you going, because people do all kinds of things to try to get through traumatic experiences. And so it was really important to me having teenagers that they had some places to put that wasn't going to just manifest itself in sexual activity, right? To be release, love, affirmation, serotonin, you know, we want to make sure that we do something else. And so that was the conversation with him about that. With my daughter, it really has been, because it's so funny. She's so cute. And so she's not as sexy as she may look. So like she'll see her and she'll be in the picture like, and then she's like, like just the camera. I'm like, and she's like, somebody will want this one day. I'm like, nobody wants that. Whatever you're doing right here, it's not sexy. But I think in the conversations about what's going to happen in the future, she and I said, you know, we're very similar in that way, and we're not the kind of people who can do something physical with someone and it doesn't mean anything. We're not built that way. So if you decide to do this, you have to know that you're going to be impacted. So you're going to be emotionally impacted for sure. Going to be mentally impacted for sure. And you can be physically impacted. So I had this conversation with all of her friends to talk about the fact that DNA, you know, sperm doesn't just go straight just to the uterus. You know, you can burrow in the sides. So you could keep someone's DNA in your system. And they're like, I was like, so, you know, just think about that. Every time you're going to make a choice, am I willing to risk this DNA being in my body forever? Right? You know, that I'm taking on this person. And they're like, that's so disgusting. I'm like, is it disgusting or is it truth? You know, like we'd have these really kind of light conversation, but really getting down to, at the end of the day, make decisions that are responsible, make decisions that are worthy of you. And is it worthy of you not to protect yourself? Is it worthy of you to engage in something you don't really want to do? You're not really interested in it. And if you're going to go all the way there, do pick out the precautions and enjoy yourself. Because what's the point otherwise? If you're going to break the law, don't break the law and be like, well, that was terrible. Like, you know, I was like, so, and the reality in the day is respect yourself, respect your body, you know, and give yourself some love and some grace in what you deserve. And that is to be protected, to be safe, to be honored. And so, again, she's going to college in the fall. We'll see how that turns out. So that we're on the front of that one. The other one is just, let's maintain health. If there's any problems that your girlfriend needs, have her talk to me if she can't talk to her mom or whoever else. Yeah. And keep your life together over here and health.
The other ladies, anything to add?
Yeah, for me, I remember my daughter when she went off to college. She went to Tuskegee University, and one of the things that I'm just one of those, yes, one of those very honest, like keep it gangsta. I spent the weekends in the dorm room. When I would come, I'm like, I'm not getting a hotel room. I'm sleeping right in here with y'all. What we doing? Boys sneaking in, and I would have, so the girls felt comfortable to talk to me about things. And I'm like, I want y'all to know that you shouldn't do anything in hiding that you wouldn't do in front of or in exposed. So if you can do that, like if you sneaking off with some guy that's like some bum or like the player and you don't want anybody to know, you already, anything that you feel like you have to do secret or you have to hide, then don't do it. I promise you it ain't gonna end well. Like, I'm living proof that it never ends well. And so in the times that I spent, I would tell them, you know, hey, when you go out to tonight, like, don't put a drink down and walk away from it. Like, with that same psychology and self-preservation that you're in, I want you to protect everything. You know, girls get raped when they go to college. You know, girls do things that they didn't want to do when they put themselves in. And it's funny that my daughter, she's dating a young man now that plays for the Atlanta Hawks. And she was laughing with him last night and saying, you know, my mom used to tell me all the time that if I didn't, if she wasn't aware of where I was, because I would say to her, don't tell me you're going to be at the mall and you at the bowling alley. Like, just tell me where you are, because I can't protect you if I don't know. And she my running joke with her, and it wasn't a joke, it was a very serious thing. We were watching this documentary yesterday, is you're going to be a sex slave. They are taking girls, they are snatching girls up, and they will make you a sex slave. Like, it is not funny. It is not a joke. And the prettiest girls, the ones that put on and you want to present something, you want to be picked up. So I need you to guard yourself. Everything about it is, how do I protect myself, and what does self-preservation look like for me? And so I would say these things to her, and I'm like, I'm not saying don't go out and have fun. I'm saying when you do, you have to make sure you have all of these things checked off. Somebody knows where you are. Somebody knows what you're doing. If you are with somebody that you don't feel comfortable with everybody knowing, or with me knowing, you should not be with him. And that is in any way. Don't touch, don't give. So the one of the things that I taught her, because I didn't do these things, and I wasn't taught, like, you know, you should always wear protection. I wasn't the one that was protected all the time, because I thought I was in power, and I was everything about it was wrong. Everything about the way that I approached life, sexuality, and all of that was wrong. And it was in this chaos of what became my life post-trauma. So I say to her, hey, you got to be very careful to maintain your power, because what nobody ever told me was that was where my power lied. My power lied in me protecting myself, in self-preservation. When you saw me, I didn't look hungry. I could have been hungry, thirsty, sad, and all those things, but you're not going to see that, because people prey on people like that. Men who are not good people prey. Religious leaders prey on little girls who are docile, and who, you know, but prey on little boys that are, you know, that need guidance. And so you got to, like, figure out how and find a village of people who care the same as you for the things that you want to do. Because, and I would tell her, she had a lot of opportunities to go and do really fabulous things when she was young, and I would say no. And they would be like, why won't your mama let you go to the Hamptons with Puffy? You're not going to the Hamptons with Puffy. Who's going to be there watching y'all? Well, Mom, everybody's going. No, ma'am, you ain't going. I can guarantee you in 5 years, you're going to look at yourself and measure yourself against the girls who went, and it's not going to be the same. And she's like, Mom, you were right. Let me tell you what such and such is doing. Let me say. I was like, I couldn't explain it to you then, because you couldn't hear. Because all you were hearing was no, no, no. And I'm like, just trust me on this. Like, trust me. Like, I got you. Like, we can do some other stuff. So that part of her self-preservation is she's now 30, about to be 31. So God's grace that I survived this long. But yeah, she is amazing. Right? She is an amazing human being. So against the backdrop of everything that we've experienced and gone through, I feel the success, because you're an amazing human being, and I can trust you in the world with other human beings that you're going to love, you're going to do right, your karma is going to be amazing, and you're going to come back here with honor, and you're going to be able to stand in front of me and not be ashamed of anything that you've said, done, or any place that you've been. And so then that's the way that you'll have a great life. Like, it's so much life to live. If you live it all now and you do it all now, you're squandering up your future. So if you can kind of leave a little bit of, you don't have to have sex. You do not have to have sex at all. You know that, right? It doesn't, I mean, I know that your doctor said at 40 needed a little tweaking, but you do not have to. It's, nobody has died from not being able to have sex or not being able to do things, whatever their choices are. But the one thing that you will die from is loneliness, diseases, HIV and AIDS, because of that one time that you made a decision that you probably really didn't feel good about, and it cost you everything. And it's not worth the gamble. It's not worth the gamble.
And the ladies have done such a beautiful job. Like I said, over the years, I've exposed my daughter to, I've tried to be age and stage appropriate, because not everybody experiences the stage at the same age. And so when there was an opportunity or some relevance, then I would share information. And she was learning kind of the basics from me at school about the basics about, protection, using condoms, all those kinds of things. And I check in, okay, trying to figure out, okay, what stage are you in? But all along, the message has been, when you're ready to go to the next stage, talk to me, and then I'll get you ready for that next stage. Don't be, whatever it is, don't be afraid to come and talk to me so that you can be prepared for that next stage. And I'm here with you as you go. So that has been my overall approach to it. Because sometimes you can give kids or people information too early. They don't get it, they can't get it because they're not dealing with it. Right. So there's no specific time. Every child and human is different. Like I said, I'm getting, my friends are telling me in my 50s stuff, they're like, we experienced that. That's in concept. No. But that's how I held on to my sanity all these years. But now, even it's happening, it's not, I'm feeling hurt, but I'm not doing the drive-bys. I know not to do the drive-bys, but I'm crying. I'm crying a little more than I thought I would, but, so it's all age and stage. And so one of the next things I'm going to do is share this live stream with her, because I believe this is going to be really helpful to her. And I'm hoping and going to encourage her to share with her peers and others to do that, because we need to have more real conversations like we had today. And thank you, Renee, Dr. Renee and Cara, for putting this together, because it's so necessary, and the sponsors and partners who made this discussion possible. It was a pleasure and a privilege to share the conversation with Bahia and Lisa and you, Dr. Renee. It's just really been a blessing.
Ladies, thank you for joining us and for your open, honest sharing. Very open and honest. Thank you. I also want to thank our co-collaborating partner, the HVTN Faith Initiative. We will have more ongoing dialogues around the intersectionality of faith on various matters as we continue this partnership. And thank you for joining us, and be blessed. And everyone, have a great night, and we'll see you next week.